Welcome to Real Talk Manitoba, a podcast bringing you monthly insights into all things real estate from Manitoba Realtors. Welcome back for episode 12 of Real Talk Manitoba. I'm your host, David von Mayenfeld, and I'm delighted to welcome one of the truly most affable individuals you will ever encounter. And I'm not just talking about real estate. From Royal LePage, Martin Liberty Realty in Brandon, Manitoba, associate broker, Sandy Donald Jr. Sandy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sandy, would you do us the honor and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in real estate?
Sure. As you said, I'm an associate broker at Royal LePage, Martin Liberty Realty in Brandon. I've been in the real estate for 25 plus years. I started out mainly in farm sales, but have diversified into now I do pretty much all aspects of real estate, including the management side.
Sounds good. Well, let me ask you the dumbest question of the day. Were you born and raised in Brandon, Manitoba?
I, surprisingly enough, was not born and raised in Brandon, Manitoba. I moved to Canada when I just shy of my 17th birthday. We moved to a farm just outside of Brandon, and we've been farming there ever since, and then added real estate to our portfolio.
Okay, so did you move from Germany or?
Shockingly enough, we moved from Scotland.
Really?
We were dairy farmers, yes. I know it's a surprise. We were dairy farmers in the Clyde Valley, south of Glasgow, and my dad decided that he'd had enough of milking cows, so we moved to a grain farm just outside of Brandon, Manitoba. Not a culture shock at all, to be honest.
Yeah. So why Brandon? How did you guys end up settling in Westman?
When Dad was first thinking about moving, there was a company from Brandon. They were a real estate company, Braun and Braun Real Estate. They were doing a tour of Scotland about farming in Manitoba. So my dad went along to it, and then his first trip out was to see that company in Brandon, and he just fell in love with the Westman area. It suited us price-wise, and just everything sort of clicked for Dad and for us when we arrived. So that's why we're outside Brandon.
Nice. Well, let me ask you, for say the 1% of us who might know a fraction of what you know about farmland real estate, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's there's different types of farming, and to get viable units, it takes different acres. We used to go over to Britain and we sold a lot of farms right throughout Manitoba to people from the UK and Ireland. Somebody that's already established here can add farmland onto what they already own to expand, but people that are coming in through the immigration system, they really need something that's going to be a viable unit, is going to give them a living in order to satisfy people that are in the immigration process. So it depends on where you are in that spectrum as to what you're going to buy and your reason for buying it.
So is there anything about this segment of the market that you would say would be particularly surprising or most people might not know?
I don't think it's really surprising. I think through the years, the size of farm operations and the price of those operations has really accelerated, especially in the last 10, 15 years, I would say. It was very much tied to production value. Now it's not really tied to production value. There's a lot less of the family style farms, a lot more of the commercial style farms that are out there right now. So it depends on what you're doing as far as size and all of that type of stuff is concerned. Plus, it depends what you're producing. If you're producing grain or eggs or milk or whatever, they all have different flavors and different characteristics as far as farmland's concerned.
Yeah. So how's the clientele different in farmland versus residential per se?
It's fantastic because I can wear blue jeans and a shirt and I can go out and meet my clients, because if I show up in a three-piece suit in a farmer's yard, he's going to say, "What are you doing here? One of us just doesn't belong, and it's not me." So yeah, it's fantastic. Everybody's really they're jealous of how I can dress as far as my everyday real estate career is concerned. The people that are farmers, they love the industry that they are in. And they're very passionate about it. It's their business, it's their livelihood, it's their lifestyle, which is a lot different than in residential real estate, where it's just, to me, as somebody that's on the outside looking in, maybe a little bit in residential, it's somewhere to put your head and sleep at night. But it's also a status symbol, and farmers really don't go down that road.
Serious question here.
Okay.
Do you wear a three-piece suit for your residential clients?
No. I do dress up occasionally, but three-piece suits in me are pretty much strangers. I might wear a sports jacket and to dress up my pair of jeans, but generally that's what you get, David, as you know.
Is it more the Canadian tuxedo or?
No, I don't mix my denim, to be honest with you. I do wear, and surprisingly, coming from Scotland, I don't particularly care for tweed either. So it's generally something that's sort of neutral, not too flashy, which is my sort of thing. So,
well, I guess mixing and matching denim is kind of a fox paw, as they call it in France, right?
Yeah, that's
faux pas. Some people might say that.
Faux pas. Yeah. I've heard that, but I've never used it.
So let's talk a little bit more about the market and brand. I know it's a different part of the province than Winnipeg. Winnipeg captures a lot of the headlines here, somewhat similar to the way that Toronto does on a national scale. Can you share with us, something that our listeners might not know about branded Westman and how it's different from the rest of the province?
Yeah, sure. We're very agricultural based. It's not just the farmland, but all our business is basically agricultural based in the western part of the province. Brandon's only got 50,000 people in it, but we are still very much agricultural based. We don't have a lot of the ups and downs of a lot of different real estate markets. We are generally, I always say, we're pretty vanilla. We can be, on average, before COVID, we were about 4% year on year increase in value, maybe increase in ends, that type of a thing. But with COVID, when COVID hit, it took that right off the table. It was, we never really had a large amount of multiple bids for homes and asking prices, selling prices above asking prices. We never really had a lot of that, but that became the norm for about 18 to 24 months. A lot of the people that had been in the business far longer than me had never seen that. Right now, we are sitting with an average home price for Brandon and extended area, just the top side of 300,000 for the first time ever. We are sitting about 305,000, I think. Brandon area realtors put out their stats, and that was the first time that we'd crept over 300,000 for a single family dwelling.
Would it be a mistake to suggest that you could sell your home in Winnipeg, move to Brandon, and buy a brand new 2-story, 4-bedroom house for remarkably less than you might find in the city or the outskirts of the city?
I would say that that's probably true. I don't know the Winnipeg market all that well. There are people that are far more educated about that than me. But I think that your average home price is substantially above where ours is at 305. So just with pure economics, I would say that if you take a pot of money, $500,000, and you try and apply it to the residential market in Brandon versus Winnipeg, you're going to maybe get a little more for your money in Brandon than you would in Winnipeg, but you're going to lose out on certain things socially and those types of things, probably as far as what people's view is concerned.
Well, I don't want to sell Brandon short here. I've never lived in Brandon, but I think Brandon is somewhere that has traditionally punched above its weight in terms of a place to live. You have a great junior hockey team. It's produced a lot of professional players per capita relative to other parts of the country. Like, pump Brandon up a little bit for me here.
Well, no, you know what? As far as junior hockey is concerned, as much as I know about hockey, you can write in the back of a stamp. But I grew up, like from 17, I grew up in Brandon. I moved to Winnipeg for 5 years. I was in accounting here, and I worked in Winnipeg for 5 years. I went back to Brandon when I got married to live and to continue my career. So, and it's not just because because that's where I moved to first when I came to Canada. It has a lot to offer. It's a very small town, but with big town attitude, and we love it. It's a great place for us to raise our children. And I've got no plans to leave Brandon and move anywhere else, even when I retire, which, as you can tell from my hairline, is approaching rapidly.
Talking about culture, you moved from Scotland. Were there any key similarities culture-wise that you noticed when you moved to Canada? And conversely, any stark differences?
Culturally, what I found was that the western part of the province is predominantly an Anglo-Saxon sort of an area. Like we moved to an area just outside of Brandon. It's a town called Alexander, which is actually my real first name. Alexander Donald is my real first name. So we moved 6,000 miles to live in Alexander, Manitoba, and all the street names there are all things to do with Scotland, like Clyde. We were in the Clyde Valley, and there's Clyde Street in it. So culturally, there wasn't a big change. The biggest change that I found when we moved here was we had come and saw it, Canada, during the summer. My dad first came out in the winter, but you don't believe everything your father tells you about what the winter's like. I thought he was maybe exaggerating a wee bit. And then we arrived, took over our farm in October, and we arrived in Winnipeg in a snowstorm. And that was your starter for 10. You were sort of off and running then going, yeah, this is a different world. Like, I show people a farm in the winter time because they want to come and see it at its worst, and perceptually they want to see Canada at its worst, so they come in the winter time, and then they come back in the summer and they do not believe it's the same place, the same farm, just because of the stark differences that there is in the properties and in Manitoba between the winter and the summer.
Well, thanks for that, Sandy, and good points. People don't realize this who don't live on the prairies, just how amazing the summers are here. And
100%.
Let's talk. Let me shift a little bit back to the market. I know it's been an eventful past couple of years here with the pandemic and the impact on the real estate industry. Here we are in the latter part of the year. Things are easing back to normal, it feels. Do you have any predictions for the months ahead in terms of how the market is going to unfold?
In the Brandon area, we're probably coming back to more of a balanced market. It was definitely a seller's market for such a long time. It's not a buyer's market at the moment, but it's definitely moving back to a balanced market. Days on the market, inventory, all of those things are pointed towards more of a balanced market moving forward. I think interest rates are going to have a bit of an influence on not just residential sales, but sales right across the board. We're getting back to, quote unquote, a sense of normalcy. We're back to where we were maybe at 2019. Maybe that 4% increase year over year. We've had our blip in the market. Some people took advantage of it. Some people weren't able to, simply because of inventory that we had at that time. But I think that right now, Brandon is more going back to a balanced market than anything else.
Given where we are right now in the market, is there a particular piece of advice you have for buyers and conversely sellers right now that might be a little different than you might have given a few months ago?
I'm not 100% sure that the advice that I would give changed at all, because the advice I give is always the same, regardless of whether the market's up or the market's down. It's all a journey, and you got to fit everything into the journey that where you're going. So if you're selling or if you're buying, it's just a segment of the journey of your life. So it's got to suit you, and you've got to do your due diligence to make sure that that piece of the jigsaw fits perfectly to what you want to do.
So, Sandy, we have time for about 3 or 4 more questions, and I want to have a little bit of fun here.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Do you have a funny or, interesting story from your time in the industry that you care to share with our listeners?
I've only once had a situation where my seller wanted to stick a pitchfork into the purchaser of their property in a dairy farm. It was a bit of a conflict. I left Brandon at 3 o'clock in the morning because we had to prep check the cows because it was a dairy farm. And it took until 9 o'clock that night to get the signatures on it so that the deal was done. So I got back home because it was about a 3.5 hour drive. I got home after midnight, but the deal was done. But it's the only time I've ever had my seller threatened to pitchfork the person that was actually buying their property, and it completed.
Uh-oh. So best day as a realtor and worst day as a realtor?
I have lots of good days as a realtor. I don't know if I can say there's a best day. Everybody might think it's, finishing a big deal or when you get a big commission or something like that. Good days as a realtor is putting the right person with the right property and knowing that they're happy and you could walk into their house or their farm and have a cup of coffee with them anytime. Those are good days. Bad days is when you have to give people bad news, or people give you bad news about a deal going south when they really have their heart set on something. And luckily, in my career, the good days have far outweighed the bad days.
There you go. Can we get a little warm and fuzzy here before we wrap up? I want to ask you, in real estate, we're big about giving back to the community and volunteerism. And I know you've been doing some great work locally and nationally. Could you tell us a little bit about your work?
Brandon wise, I do a lot of stuff with the Scottish community. I was the president of the Scottish Association until recently, and I handed that over to my niece. We have a big festival. It's sort of like a mini Folkorama. We just hold it over one weekend with pavilions, and I'm on the treasurer of the board that puts that on. I'm a big rugby guy. I was recently voted on to the board of Rugby Canada. I've been on the president of Rugby Manitoba for 6 years before that. And for fun, I do international rugby games. So I go and I'm the match commissioner for that to make sure that everybody gets along and toes the line correctly. And yeah, those are all the things that I do outside of it. And any time that there's something that comes up in Brandon that probably needs a helping hand, I occasionally put my hand up for it, as long as I have a bit of an interest in it. You can spread yourself like too little butter over too much toast, unless you can say no. And so I like to pick things that I have an interest in, because then it energizes me and I know I can do a good job of it.
Well, you got to know what side your toast is buttered, right?
Well, especially when it falls on the floor, you got to know whether you can blow it off or you have to put it in the rubbish.
Very serious question here. There's 2,600 amazing realtors and real estate professionals in Manitoba. Why you?
Why me? I think that because I cover all elements of the spectrum, all the way from farmland down to condominiums. I've got 25 plus years experience. I'm associate broker at the company that I work for. So I think that there's a lot to be said for the interpersonal relations. And I'm, like you said, I'm an affable person. I get along with everybody. And I think that you need that connection with the person that you're going to do business with, because at the end of the day, you can't do everything over the internet like we're doing this. You've got to sit down, you've got to trust the person. And I think I've proven to be trustworthy over the years.
Well, there's lots of things in real estate that money can buy, but great Scottish one-liners is you can't put that on the Visa card, right?
There's thank God.
You'll be racking up quite a bill. Well, Sandy, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast, and to our listeners, thank you for tuning in for episode 12 of Real Talk Manitoba. My name is David Von Mayenfeld, and please join us again for our next episode and even more great discussion on real estate in Manitoba.